The strong wind was freezing when I reached the snow-covered roof, which honestly felt quite remarkable at first, given the stifling heat inside. Still, it didn't take long for the cold to feel as though it was biting right through me. The chill aggravated my still leaking hand, though the blood flow had slowed considerably. As I paced on, I found it difficult to even hold myself upright, let alone push my body onward, but I knew I had to. The first several steps required far more effort than I had hoped, leaving me unsure if I would even be capable of completing my self-appointed mission. Perhaps it was the guilt I still felt over what I had done to my cousin that inspired me to continue to force one foot in front of the other. But I dreaded to think what the cute little pigtailed girl was enduring while I trudged through the thick snow. Once I got into a rhythm, I managed to quicken my pace, but only slightly. Pushing against the strong and icy wind, combined with the high strides I was having to take to break each step free from the snow, made swift progress out of the question. But it was progress nonetheless. I could barely see 4 feet in front of me, let alone whatever distance I would have to traverse before reaching a battle I was sure to lose. But I wouldn't let that stop me. I plundered on with purpose, and with every single successful step, I was more and more driven by that. I had no way of telling how much time had passed by as I leapt from train car to train car. The first jump was the hardest and the most terrifying, but not unlike those initial hesitant footfalls. Every leap was less scary than the last. By the time I saw a faint light ahead of me, I had successfully cleared 6 boxcars. As I drew closer to the light, I could see it flicker like fire, though it appeared to float several feet above the roof.
You should not be up here, little boy.
A voice even deeper than that of the conductor spoke. I felt my bladder attempt to give way as the shimmering light moved closer to me, revealing what appeared to be an incredibly tall person with an ancient-looking fire lantern for a head. It wore a long brown snow-speckled coat which came down to feet that were buried in the snow. Its long arms hung just past where I presumed its knees to be, as it stared down at me. Well, as much as a lamp can stare, I suppose. Still, I could feel it glaring at me, causing that same discomfort the conductor's wide-eyed gaze caused. I have to get by, I said, doing my best impersonation of someone with actual confidence in their words. Without another word, its long arms reached towards me. I ducked down and rolled through the snow, managing to avoid its grasp, but this did not get me any closer to my goal. It swiped at me with the right arm, following with another swing from its left. Fortunately, the thing did not move quickly, and I found myself able to dodge. It just continued to swat at me, while I tumbled and leapt around the elongated limbs, while attempting to locate any way of getting past. Finally, I noticed a split in the long coat, where the buttons ended just above the presumed knees. As both arms reached out for me again, I jumped forwards into the open section of the trench coat. The legs I now crouched between looked thin and frail, so before the bony hands, which were attempting to reach me through the opening, could grab me, I kicked at the left foot, which stood in the thick snow to my right. Even with my small and weak stature, it didn't take much force to cause the tall creature to stumble. As the leg I kicked slid to the side of the roof of the train, the other came crashing down on me. Before it could pummel me to the ground, I rolled out through the curtain-like back of the long coat. Once I was clear, I turned around to see arms and legs flailing as the lamp-headed thing stumbled off the speeding train. I saw nothing more than a quick flash of light, followed by a thin line of smoke rising from where I assume it made contact onto the ground. With my heart still hammering, I stood up on my trembling legs and started back on the path in the hopes of tracking my quarry before whatever the conductor had planned for the little girl occurred. Though I feared I would run into another of whatever that thing with the flickering head was, I did not run into any more obstacles until I reached the front of the train. The carriages ended, with only a long trolley filled with coal and the engine just ahead of it. Just as I started to gather up enough courage to leap into the rough and jagged coal, I found myself nearly paralyzed with fear when a familiar voice spoke from behind me.
"And where do you think you're going?"
The conductor spoke directly into my ear. I spun in place to see his wide eyes and grinning face only inches from mine. He stood in place, leaning over at the waist to gaze directly at me. I, um, I was... I could barely form anything close to actual words while we stared at one another.
Well, speak up, boy.
His darkened eyes formed that unsettling scowl again. The girl? I asked in a little more than a stuttered whisper.
Ejected, I'm afraid. Would you like to join her?
We just stared at each other for a moment. I was terrified that I was about to be launched from this very spot, only to crash down to the ground around us. I couldn't help but wonder if this would be a better option to whatever hell he had in store for me, if I were to be permitted to remain on board.
I didn't think so,
he said, wrapping his fingers around my face and lifting me from the snowy roof. I braced myself in preparation for being tossed like a rag doll, but he did not throw me over the side. He just stomped in wide strides, with me hanging from my head in his outstretched arm. He stepped in wide strides, crossing the carriages much faster than my tiny legs had. Though I wouldn't say I was particularly comfortable, dangling like a fleshy Christmas ornament by the face, I was beginning to feel secure that my punishment may not be overly severe this time. Naturally, I got too far ahead of myself. He said, stopping in place. He glanced back into my eyes, one of which was covered by his large palm.
It's quite cool out here, isn't it?
With those words, my heart began to race again.
One rule.
The words echoed from the back of my mind. I hadn't broken the law of the train by climbing out of my seat, not when I crossed through the other cars, nor when I tipped my attacker off the side. Stepping out into the cold night in the first place, however, that's where I crossed the line. The smile on the conductor's face practically extended to his ears as the malice formed on his brow once more. He tilted his head to the side, studying what he could to see my face through his fingers. He reached his other hand up and snapped his fingers again, causing the hand which held me to burst into flames. The pain was immediate and unbearable. I screamed out as my skin bubbled, popped, and dripped onto my shoulder, while fluids leaked down the conductor's arm. I could feel my flesh peeling away in thin sheets, while my eyeballs popped and oozed from their sockets. As the tall man paced on, I lost all track of the passage of time, existing only in the insufferable agony of my melting head. Somewhere along the line, I must have blacked out. It wasn't until my body was tossed onto the hard floor of the cabin behind the one which still held the other terrified children that I became aware once more. As soon as my regrown eyes opened, I grabbed at my face to find that everything felt intact again, though I remembered every single excruciating second before I passed out.
Should I strap you down, or will you behave?
He asked, glaring down at me with his hands behind his back. I just nodded, unable to make my voice again, hoping that he would understand which part of his question I was agreeing to. I grabbed onto the armrest of the chair closest to me and heaved myself up from the floor. I planted down into the seat, to which the conductor returned a nod. He then spun in place, stepped through the door, before gently sliding it shut. As soon as he was out of sight, I fell into wailing sobs before curling up in the fetal position on the chair. Hours seemed to trickle by as I lay across the seats, trying my hardest to fall asleep to escape this nightmare. Every time I closed my eyes, it was as though I saw myself from the outside, watching my face melt away. I also couldn't evade the guilt I was feeling from being unable to save the little girl who was apparently thrown from the train. I couldn't figure out why the conductor got so angry at her, nor why he appeared unaware of her even being there in the first place. Of course, nothing made any sense since I boarded this hell on wheels. After giving up on my attempts to sleep, I sat back upright in my seat to look out the window at the world beyond the glass. I no longer saw the same snowy landscape, but an unnerving lack of anything. It wasn't like the night sky had grown so dark, hiding the world behind its blanket. It was just nothingness. Though the train still felt as though it were speeding along the metal tracks, I saw no evidence of any road through the seemingly endless void. It was almost hypnotizing to look upon, though my mind could not make any rational sense of it. The longer I gazed through the glass, the more the emptiness mesmerized me.
Did he hurt you?
The voice practically caused me to leap from my skin as I sat, zoned out in front of the window. I slowly turned my body around to see Sophie once more perched on the seat across from me. "Is it really you?" I asked, pressing my back against the glass, fearing this was some sort of trick being played on me.
Thank you
She cut her eyes down to the floor.
for trying to rescue me.
"He said he ejected you." I still wasn't ready to believe this wasn't some sort of cruel trick.
He tried. I thought I was done for, but I managed to grab onto the railing before I hit the ground.
She still wouldn't meet my eyes, which only made me less willing to believe what she was saying. I just continued to stare at her. I couldn't even begin to fathom the odds of her claims being possible, even though I was just a child. Santa Claus? Yes, of course he was real, regardless of what my cousin thought. Scooby-Doo? Obviously based on true events. I'm sure he couldn't, really talk, but they have to exaggerate things for TV. A young girl being tossed from a speeding train in the middle of an icy cold expanse? Luckily, wrapping her fingers around a metal railing, saving herself from certain doom? Yeah, no. Unlikely at best.
I swear I'm telling the truth.
She pleaded, finally locking eyes with me while sliding off her seat to cross the aisle towards me. I still pushed my body against the glass, terrified of the possibilities of what actually stood before me, dressed up as a little girl. That was until she sat beside me and placed her warm hand on the side of my face. There was something about her touch that caused my heart to regulate for the first time since stepping into this godforsaken train. I hadn't realized I was trembling this whole time until my skin stopped shivering. My back relaxed, and my body almost drooped exhaustively from the weight of all the pain and anguish I had suffered fading away into the background. Before I knew it, I wrapped my arms around her and pulled her close to me. I laid my head on her shoulder and cried harder than I had in years, even more than after the conductor left me alone in this carriage. I wailed from the lingering guilt of the actions that led me here, along with so many others that had only now become clear. Yes, I was just a small child. It's easy to claim that I didn't know any better, but I did. Somewhere in the deepest pits of my mind, I knew what a spoiled and selfish little bastard I was, and for the first time ever, I wanted to change. I saw flashes of the exhausted looks on my parents' face when I would lose it in public or around others. I heard the sounds of my mother sobbing when I had pushed her way too far so many times. At that very moment, as I spilled a seemingly endless river of tears onto Sophie's coat, I swore I would make things right if I was ever able to return to my home again. Truth be told, I could have sat there for hours, content in the arms of someone I had never laid eyes on before this day. But like every other fleeting fancy on this voyage of the damned, it was to be short-lived. I didn't even hear the door slide back open before the bellowing voice of the no longer smiling conductor raged from the front of the cab.
How did you get back here?
In an instant, Sophie pulled away from me and leapt from the seat to stand in the center of the aisle, glaring up at the tall man in the dark red suit, just as she had before. She didn't even appear frightened while they waged a staring battle that sent shivers up the length of my spine while forming goosebumps across my skin.
You have overstepped your bounds, Abigor.
The little girl said in a voice strong and proud.
This train is mine, Sophie. You have no jurisdiction here.
His voice sounded sinister as it moaned the words filled with sheer hatred. As the conductor slowly paced towards her, a long and jagged blade manifested in his hand, which reflected the dim lights of the cabin across the walls. While the pig-tailed little girl stood her ground as David facing the hulking Goliath, I found myself filled with a purpose I had never felt before. Though it was similar to what struck me when he first pulled her from her seat in the other carriage, that need to protect her. This was it. This was far more intense. This child was special. She was scared. I had never performed a selfish act in my entire life. Well, all 10 years of it anyway. It was time for me to make my stand. My own fear practically melted away the instant I saw the man reach his sword high above his head to strike her down, while she bowed her head, seemingly accepting her fate. As the scene played out before me in almost slow motion, I jumped from my seat, pushing Sophie away from the approaching man. "Run," I said, offering a sincere smile to the girl who now stared at me with tears welling in her eyes. I stood in place, blocking her from the sword which sliced down through the air to split me in two. I closed my eyes, feeling content in the knowledge that her face would be the last thing I would ever see. An awful, self-consumed brat dies, so that a brave and wonderful little girl can live. Yeah, that's a fair trade. I felt proud of my actions, a feeling I had never before known.
If you could make one wish, what would it be?
I couldn't make out where the voice was coming from. I couldn't figure out where I was, for that matter. I had no body, not one that I could see or feel anyway. I could see, but everything was shielded by an intense bright light. I think it was my street, though it was hard to tell. Was it my street? Who exactly am I? It was as though everything was hidden in plain sight behind a translucent curtain of sorts.
So, what would you wish for?
Anything at all? I asked through non-existent lips.
Within reason, of course.
I knew that voice. I had heard it only recently. She was familiar to me, but how? Where was I before I was here?
It has to be something personal, something unique to you in your life.
What do you mean? I was growing a vague awareness of who I was, but what was it that I desired?
Some ask for riches, others for fame.
That could be nice, I replied. Is that what I really wanted, though?
There are those who wish for beauty. You could grow to be the most handsome of men.
Attractive people do tend to have more doors open to them than others. Perhaps I could have it all. Money, fame, looks. No, that's not what I ached for. I had a wish not too long ago.
You could have a life many would envy.
I could, couldn't I? No, that's not what I wanted. Not like this, anyway. Can I go back? The question presented itself before I even understood what I was asking for.
Back?
I did something, didn't I? I did something bad. What was it? I want to change something that happened. Yesterday. Was it yesterday? It wasn't long ago, was it? When is now, for that matter?
Is that what you would wish for? You could have it all, you know.
No, I made a mistake. I want to take it back. Can I wish for that? Please, let me change this one thing. Let me set things right. I think I remember now. It was bad. I was bad. One more chance. That's all I want.
Perhaps you can.
You know Santa's not real, right? And you're 10 years old now. You're way too old for that baby shit.
She was poking me in the chest, giggling after every sentence. I hated it when she acted like this. So what if I still wanted to believe, huh? What's it to her anyway? The more she pushed and prodded, the more I could feel my face flush. If she was going to act this way, she shouldn't even be in my bedroom. Stop it! I screamed, pushing her back with every ounce of strength after she jabbed me in the chest again. Her eyes widened, and her lower lip quivered as she looked into my infuriated red face. Just as I readied myself to push her again, something struck me. Deja vu? No, I remember this. There's something else. That scar in the center of my hand. Suddenly, a veil lifted before my eyes. Memories spilled back into my mind as though they poured from a jug. My scowl softened. My face cooled. I looked up into the eyes of my older cousin and suddenly felt a stab of guilt.
What the hell?
Courtney cried out as I wrapped my arms around her. I'm so sorry, I said while my eyes welled up.
Oh, you're so damn weird,
she said, pushing me away before running down the stairs. I stood alone in my bedroom, watching her swiftly move out of my sight, descending the stairs the proper way as she should have been permitted to do the first time. I turned my gaze back to the interior of my room, glancing at all of my wonderful belongings. My toys and games that the average kid could hope for lazily scattered around my spacious bedroom. Items purchased with love, which I showed as little respect for as those who brought them for me. I practically sprinted down the steps towards the dining room to where my parents stood surrounded by family and friends. I could tell my father tensed up as soon as I entered the room. No doubt he was prepared for yet another day of my whining, bitching, and moaning. The look on his face was almost comical when I ran forward to hug him. He and my mother shared a shocked stare while I extended my arms around her too.
You okay, kiddo?
He asked reluctantly while placing his hand on the top of my head. I just looked up at my folks with tears still trickling down my face. I'm so sorry for everything. I promise I'm gonna try to be better. I love you both so much. They stared down at me and back at each other, completely lost for words. Things changed drastically in the weeks that followed that Christmas Eve I lived through twice. It took a while for my family to accept that I had actually changed my ways, but before long, I was closer to my mom and dad than I had ever been. Even Courtney became almost like a sister to me. Though she was a few years older than I, she only lived a few blocks away. She would babysit me for free when my folks would enjoy the occasional night out, another thing they were hard-pressed to achieve when I was still a screeching, fit-preaching little brat, as nobody would have any desire to take care of me in their absence. The full memories of my experience on the train took some time to reform in the back of my mind, but the lessons I learned have stayed with me to this day. Sometimes, I wonder what happened to the other children I shared that train car with. Perhaps they had their own trials to endure before they would be set free. I can only hope they succeeded as I did. On occasion, I allow myself to wonder if the entire experience had only been in my head. But the small circular scar that still remains in the palm and the back of my hand would suggest that was not the case. Some years back, I married and fathered a child, a boy who was almost as prone to tantrums as I was at his age. My wife and I are trying everything we can, though little seems to have any effect. Maybe this is my karma for being such an insufferable little shit before I found a better way to live. Though my experience, almost 20 years ago now, still causes me to jerk awake from a graphic and horrific nightmare from time to time, I'm grateful for that hellish trip. My son is 10 years old now, the same age I was when my outlook changed for the better. I can't deny there's a little voice in the back of my head that secretly hopes the train arrives for him this Christmas Eve. Does that make me a bad parent?